If you would like to dive far deeper into these ideas than any single video format can reasonably allow, I have gathered them together, expanded them, and explored them thoroughly in a full-length book. You'll find a direct and convenient link to it in the description below. I am about to lay out an argument that, at first hearing, may strike you as unusual, perhaps even disturbing. Yet I am convinced that it follows directly from our best understanding of physics, thermodynamics, and the fundamental nature of living systems. Death, in the strictest physical sense, is not an event. It is not a sharply defined instant at which something basic in the universe suddenly changes. It is not a clean switch that flips from one ontological state to another at a precise coordinate in space-time. Instead, death is an emergent concept, a word we use to describe an extraordinarily intricate and continuous process. It is a boundary that we draw conceptually, even though nature itself does not supply a crisp dividing line. The classification depends on perspective, on context, and ultimately remains ambiguous when examined through the lens of fundamental physics. My name is Leonard Susskind, and much of my professional life has been devoted to thinking about the deepest layers of reality: quantum mechanics, black holes, and the theory of information. The further I have traveled into the foundations of physics, the clearer it has become that ideas such as life and death are not primitive ingredients of the universe. They are not written directly into the equations that govern quarks and electrons. Rather, they are emergent features of staggeringly complex systems. They do not correspond to a single sharply defined variable in the fundamental laws of nature. Let me explain what I mean. We should begin with thermodynamics, because this is where we first encounter the intimate connection between physics and life. In 1944, the Austrian physicist Erwin Schrödinger, already a Nobel Prize winner for his groundbreaking work in quantum mechanics, published a short but enormously influential book titled "What is Life?" In that book, he asked a deceptively simple yet profound question: how can living organisms maintain their astonishing degree of order in a universe governed by the second law of thermodynamics? The second law tells us that entropy, loosely interpreted as disorder, tends to increase in any closed, isolated system. Physical systems naturally evolve towards states of greater entropy, greater uniformity, and less structured complexity. Ultimately, they approach thermodynamic equilibrium, a condition in which no net flows of energy occur and no work can be extracted. And yet living organisms appear to do the opposite. They are islands of exquisite organization. DNA encodes precise sequences of information. Proteins fold into exact three-dimensional forms. Cells maintain carefully regulated internal environments. At first glance, life seems to defy the relentless march toward disorder. Does it violate the second law? Schrödinger's answer was elegant and transformative. Living systems are not closed systems. They are open systems. They continuously exchange energy and matter with their surroundings. They absorb low entropy energy, sunlight in the case of plants, chemical energy in the case of animals, and release high entropy waste products, such as heat and metabolic byproducts, back into the environment. In Schrödinger's memorable phrasing, organisms feed on negative entropy. They maintain internal order by exporting disorder outward. When you consider the organism and its environment together, the total entropy still increases, fully consistent with the second law. But locally, within the boundaries of the organism, entropy can decrease. Order can persist. Life does not break the rules of physics, it exploits them. This leads us to a powerful insight. A living organism is, by definition, a system maintained far from thermodynamic equilibrium. If it ever reaches equilibrium, if it stops exchanging energy and matter with its surroundings, it dies. From a thermodynamic standpoint, equilibrium is death. Let's make this tangible. Picture a single living cell. It takes in glucose and oxygen. It produces ATP, the energy currency of life. It synthesizes proteins, repairs damaged molecules, and maintains ion gradients across its membrane, keeping potassium concentrations high inside and sodium concentrations high outside. All of this requires energy. All of it keeps the cell in a dynamic, far from equilibrium state. Now imagine cutting off its energy supply. No more glucose, no more oxygen. ATP production slows and eventually stops. Ion gradients collapse, repair mechanisms fail, proteins degrade, membranes lose integrity, entropy rises within the cell. Gradually it approaches equilibrium with its surroundings. The inside and outside become indistinguishable in terms of temperature and chemical composition. No more work is performed, no more structured processes occur, maximum entropy is reached. At the cellular level, this is death, a transition from ordered, far from equilibrium organization to disordered equilibrium. But here is the critical question. At what exact moment did the cell die? Can you point to a precise instant? There is no sharp dividing line. The transformation is gradual. The cell slowly loses its ability to sustain order. Energy production wanes. Structural integrity declines. Damage accumulates. At some point, recovery becomes impossible. Even if energy were restored, the damage might be too severe for repair. But where exactly is that threshold? It depends on what you mean by recover. It depends on what interventions you imagine. It depends on how you define the same cell. There is no observer-independent instant at which physics declares, now the cell is dead. The boundary is fuzzy. Death is not a fundamental event like the emission of a photon. It is a gradual transition in the organization of matter. You might object, but surely we can define death precisely. We can choose a criterion: membrane rupture, DNA breakdown, cessation of ATP production. Yes, we can define operational criteria. Medicine does this all the time. For humans, we may define death by the stopping of the heart, the cessation of breathing, or the absence of brain activity. These definitions are enormously useful. They have legal and ethical importance, but they are conventions. They are not written into the equations of quantum mechanics. Take brain death. Many legal systems define death as the irreversible cessation of all brain function. But what does irreversible mean? Irreversible, given today's technology? 50 years ago, cardiac arrest was effectively irreversible. Today, defibrillators and advanced resuscitation techniques routinely reverse it. The practical boundary of death has shifted. Consider cryonics. Suppose someone is frozen immediately after clinical death, preserving much of the fine structure of the brain. Are they truly dead, or merely in suspended animation? Physics does not supply a clear answer. The molecules remain. The informational structure may remain in degraded but recoverable form. From a fundamental standpoint, the difference between a frozen dead person and a frozen person awaiting revival is not dictated by physical law. Death, here, is a label applied to a continuous physical process. Let's look more closely at cellular death. Biologically, there are two main forms: apoptosis and necrosis. Apoptosis is programmed cell death. It is orderly and controlled. The cell shrinks. DNA fragments in a regulated way. The membrane forms blebs. The cell breaks into neat packages that are cleared away by other cells. This process requires energy and is mediated by specific proteins called caspases. Billions of cells in your body undergo apoptosis every day. It sculpts your fingers during embryonic development. It removes damaged cells. It is death, but it is structured, organized death. Necrosis, by contrast, is chaotic. It results from injury or trauma. The cell swells, bursts, and spills its contents. Inflammation follows. This looks more like disorder overwhelming order. But even necrosis unfolds over time, and which pathway occurs can depend on energy availability. With ATP, a cell may undergo apoptosis. Without it, necrosis. The boundary is contextual and fluid. Now consider aging. Aging can be viewed as a slow-motion drift toward equilibrium. Telomeres, the protective ends of chromosomes, shorten with each cell division. After a certain number of divisions, known as the Hayflick limit, cells enter senescence. They no longer divide but remain metabolically active. Are senescent cells alive or dead? They function, yet they cannot proliferate. They inhabit a gray zone, and even the Hayflick limit is not absolute. Telomerase can extend telomeres. Stem cells use it. Cancer cells exploit it. The apparent countdown to death is a regulatory mechanism, not a fundamental law. Mitochondria add another layer. These cellular power plants have their own DNA and generate ATP. Over time, Mitochondrial DNA accumulates mutations. Efficiency declines. Energy production drops. Damage accumulates in a feedback loop. But this deterioration is gradual. There is no single instant when mitochondrial failure occurs. The cell struggles increasingly to maintain order, until, eventually, it cannot. Again we ask, when exactly did it die? At 50% efficiency? At 10%? Nature provides no absolute threshold. Let's shift to information theory. One way to define life is as the maintenance and processing of information. DNA encodes instructions. The brain stores memories. Cells regulate molecular states. Death can be viewed as the degradation of this information. But information loss is continuous. DNA is constantly damaged and repaired. Neurons die over time. Memories fade. Yet you remain yourself. At what percentage of information loss does death occur? There is no physics-based cutoff. From the standpoint of quantum mechanics, information is never truly destroyed. The principle of unitarity tells us that quantum evolution is reversible. Information may become scrambled, dispersed, or entangled, but not annihilated. This connects to the black hole information paradox, a subject I have worked on extensively. Matter falling into a black hole appears to lose its information. Yet current understanding suggests the information is preserved in subtle correlations within Hawking radiation. It is not lost. It is scrambled beyond practical recovery. Similarly, when a person dies, the information that constituted them does not vanish from the universe. It becomes dispersed, encoded in new arrangements of matter and energy. From a fundamental perspective, death is a reconfiguration, not an erasure. Quantum mechanics introduces even deeper subtleties. Before measurement, a quantum system exists in superposition. Only upon observation does it appear to assume a definite state. Schrödinger's cat illustrates this paradox. Until observed, the cat is both alive and dead in superposition. In reality, decoherence ensures macroscopic systems behave classically. The cat is effectively either alive or dead. But the thought experiment reveals something profound. The categories alive and dead are not embedded at the most fundamental level. They are high-level descriptions applied to complex systems. In medicine, definitions of death vary by jurisdiction and culture. Persistent vegetative states raise difficult questions. Different observers, using different criteria, may classify the same physical system differently. This variability reflects the emergent nature of the concept. Life is emergent. Temperature is emergent. Pressure is emergent. They arise from collective behavior, not from individual particles. Death, as the breakdown of life's organization, is likewise emergent. It does not appear in Schrödinger's equation. It is a macroscopic label. At the fundamental level, when an organism dies, atoms rearrange. Bonds break and form. Energy redistributes. Entropy increases locally. The underlying particles obey the same laws they always have. Nothing in the bedrock equations changes. You might say, this is mere wordplay. Of course, there is a difference between a living person and a corpse, and that difference matters profoundly, emotionally, ethically, practically. But understanding that death is a gradual process rather than a discrete event changes how we think about identity. Are you the same person you were 10 years ago? Most of your cells have turned over. Memories have changed. Where did the old you end and the new you begin? The boundary is as blurry as the boundary between life and death. It also matters for speculative technologies. If death is fundamentally irreversible, cryonics is hopeless. But if death is information scrambling, then in principle, though perhaps never in practice, reversal is not forbidden by physics. Consider a thought experiment. Imagine scanning your brain at molecular resolution, recording every detail. Then your brain is destroyed. By conventional standards, you are dead. Years later, a new brain is reconstructed atom for atom from the scan and placed into a cloned body. From the perspective of that person, they went to sleep and woke up years later. They remember your life. Are they you? Did you die, or did you survive a discontinuity? Physics cannot decide. The physical processes are identical either way. The question is philosophical. This scenario is not entirely fanciful. We already preserve tissues through vitrification. We freeze embryos and revive them decades later. The line between life and death is blurrier than language suggests. Let me be absolutely clear. I am not minimizing death. It is among the most significant realities of human life. It brings grief, shapes culture, defines urgency and meaning. Clear medical criteria are essential for ethical and legal reasons. What I'm saying is that, from the perspective of fundamental physics, death is not a singular event. It is a process of rising entropy, degrading information, and collapsing organization. It is an emergent abstraction we impose on nature. The molecules in your body do not know they are alive. They do not know when you die. They obey quantum mechanics and thermodynamics. These laws, apart from entropy's arrow, are time-symmetric. They do not single out death as special. To grasp this deeply transforms how we think about mortality, identity, and existence itself. Death is real, but not in the way you think.